The fluorescent light in the garage flickered above Thomas's head as he dozed off in a worn-out office chair, still in his janitor uniform. The man was surrounded by tools, oil stains, and silence except for the gentle rustle of papers. His hand, calloused and rough, rested over a fourth-grade math worksheet, half filled with pencil marks and childlike eraser smudges. The clock read 3:14 a.m. Outside, the cold Michigan night wrapped around the house like a blanket of glass. Inside, in the tiny bedroom down the hall, two children slept soundly, unaware that their father had just come home from his third shift of the week. 15 years ago, Thomas had been a different man. A mechanical engineer, a loving husband, a hopeful father of newborn twins. But life doesn't ask permission when it takes everything from you. After losing his wife in childbirth, Thomas made a choice. He would never let Ethan and Ellie feel that loss, even if it meant disappearing into the shadows to hold their world together. Before we dive in, have you ever forgotten someone who once saved you? Let us know in the comments. Tonight, he was just a janitor. But in 15 years, his children would make him a millionaire without ever knowing what it cost him. Before the oil stains and overnight shifts, Thomas Reynolds was a man with a future sculpted in precision. As a mechanical engineer at a rising Detroit firm, he had been on the fast track to management by 30. He wore crisp shirts, drank overpriced coffee, and spent his weekends designing wooden toys in the garage for the twins his wife was carrying. Life with Marie was warm. They'd been college sweethearts. She was all color and laughter, and he was the steady calm in the storm. When they found out they were expecting twins, he built 2 cribs by hand, carved with the names Ethan and Ellie, before they'd even settled on them officially. But then came the birth. Complications, blood loss, silence. Marie never opened her eyes again. The hospital handed Thomas 2 tiny bundles wrapped in pink and blue, and he held them in trembling arms, numb and barely breathing. One nurse tried to console him. "At least you have them," she whispered. He didn't answer. In that moment, he felt nothing. Not joy, not love, just absence. The days that followed were a blur of diapers, formulas, and grief. The engineering firm offered unpaid leave, then gently suggested he consider parting ways. Daycare costs were astronomical, and no amount of spreadsheets could reconcile time away from the babies with the salary he was offered to stay. So he left it all behind. Thomas sold their 2-bedroom condo and moved into a fixer-upper on the outskirts of town. He bought a rusted pickup and took a janitorial job at the local parts factory night shifts, minimum wage. It was the only way he could be home during the day when the twins needed him most. By day, he was daddy the one, making dinosaur pancakes, patching scraped knees, singing lullabies even when his voice cracked from exhaustion. By night, he was invisible, mopping up someone else's mess and sleeping in 90-minute shifts. He promised himself one thing: Ethan and Ellie would never know what he gave up. They would grow up feeling safe, not burdened, loved, not guilty. Neighbors watched in confusion. Friends drifted away. His in-laws questioned his decisions and even suggested taking the twins, insisting it would be best for everyone. He smiled politely, then locked the door behind them. His world became small, focused, 2 kids, 1 man, and a mountain of quiet sacrifice. It was a Wednesday morning when the letter came. Thomas stood in the doorway, holding a wrinkled envelope from a law office in Ohio, his late wife's hometown. His hands trembled as he opened it. The words were clinical but crushing. Marie's parents were filing for joint custody of Ethan and Ellie. They claimed Thomas was emotionally unfit and financially unstable. He sank into the porch step as the autumn wind danced around him, carrying away the breath in his lungs. It wasn't entirely unexpected. From the start, Marie's parents had opposed his decision to raise the twins alone. They wanted the children in a stable, traditional environment home with grandparents, cousins, church Sundays, and a well-off school district. Not a rundown house on a cracked street with a father who smelled like bleach and engine oil. Thomas had always been respectful, even when they called him foolish. But this was war, and he had nothing, no money for lawyers, no reputation to lean on. Just a janitor's badge and a pair of wide-eyed children who still thought he was a superhero. The stress began to seep in. Ethan developed a fever one night, burning hot and listless. Thomas rushed him to the ER with Ellie asleep on his shoulder, only to find out it was pneumonia. He spent the night in the hospital chair, holding his son's hand, praying feverishly not just for recovery, but that child services wouldn't show up and decide he was unfit. He called in sick to his shift, a first in over 2 years. The factory manager didn't take it well. "You're replaceable," the man barked over the phone. "You miss another night, don't bother coming back." Thomas didn't answer. He just stared at Ethan's pale face and made another silent vow. "Let them take my job, my house, my pride, but not my kids." The next day, he pawned his last valuable possession, Marie's old violin, the one she played every Sunday morning, to pay a family lawyer for a single consultation. That meeting changed everything. The lawyer warned him plainly, if they can prove financial instability or poor living conditions, they have a shot. Thomas walked out of that office, not defeated but ignited. He began fixing the house at night after work, patched up the roof with salvaged wood, repainted the twins' room, rewired broken outlets using borrowed tools. He turned down overtime to attend parent-teacher conferences, bake sales, even learned how to braid Ellie's hair from YouTube. The court date was months away, but he fought every single day like the hearing was tomorrow. Most nights, after the twins fell asleep and the factory closed its gates behind him, Thomas would pull out a battered leather notebook from beneath a loose floorboard in his bedroom. Its pages were filled with messy handwriting thoughts, regrets, memories of Marie, and letters addressed to Ethan and Ellie. He wrote in it like it was the only way to breathe. Not that he expected them to read it anytime soon, maybe not until he was gone. He had good reason for that. A year after Marie passed, Thomas had been diagnosed with congestive heart failure. The condition wasn't yet critical, but it would be, the doctor warned. Stress, lack of sleep, physical strain, it would all shorten the timeline. But he didn't tell anyone, not even his in-laws, who would have used it against him in court, and certainly not his children. They've already lost one parent, he told himself. They don't need to live in fear of losing another. So, he kept going. There was one person who knew Mr. Rick Halverson, the grizzled Vietnam vet who lived next door. Rick was the kind of man who never smiled, always wore flannel, and communicated mostly through grunts. But one night, when Thomas collapsed on his porch after a 16-hour shift, Rick found him, dragged him inside, and demanded the truth. Since then, Rick became an unlikely guardian angel. He helped repair Thomas's furnace when it broke in December, watched the kids when Thomas was too sick to get out of bed, and once a month, Rick brought over groceries with a gruff warning, "Don't argue, veterans get discounts." It was Rick who insisted Thomas keep a written record, something his kids could hold on to one day. "Memories fade," he said, "but paper endures." As the court hearing approached, Thomas wrote more feverishly. Letters to Ethan about courage, to Ellie about kindness, pages filled with advice he feared he wouldn't live long enough to give in person. He tucked small drawings from their childhood between the pages, stick figures with capes, crooked hearts, finger-painted suns. He gave the notebook to Rick with a quiet request. "If something happens, give this to them, but not before." Rick nodded without a word. Just placed the notebook in an old ammo box under his bed and locked it tight. Outside, life continued. Ethan and Ellie grew. They never suspected a thing. To them, Dad was just tired a lot. They couldn't see the ticking clock inside his chest, couldn't imagine the fear he swallowed every day. But Rick saw. And he knew Thomas Reynolds was a man slowly dying in silence because he'd rather lose everything than let his children carry even 1 ounce of his burden. The call came late in the evening, just after dinner. Ellie had spilled juice on her math book, and Thomas was on the floor, trying to salvage pages with a hairdryer when the number flashed across his cracked phone screen. "Mr. Reynolds, I'm calling about your mortgage," the voice began. The house was going into foreclosure. Thomas had been falling behind for months, choosing groceries over payments, medicine over heating bills. The bank had been lenient, but now the clock had run out. He stared at the kitchen ceiling, cracked and water-stained, and felt something inside him collapse. Not panic, not anger, just a quiet acceptance. That night, after the twins went to bed, he loaded a few essentials into his old pickup truck and drove to the edge of town. There, tucked behind a shuttered auto shop, he found his new bedroom. He'd sleep in the cab, shower at the factory, and tell the kids he was working overtime during the week. He sold what little remained of value: his wedding ring, Marie's tea set, the last television in the house, to keep up with school fees and groceries. The twins didn't question the missing furniture or why their dad suddenly loved the night shift so much. but the cracks began to show. Ethan, now 14, started pulling away. He'd scowl when Thomas forgot soccer practice or showed up late to parent-teacher night. "You don't even try," the boy snapped once. "Everyone else's dad has time." Oh, Thomas swallowed the sting. He wanted to scream, "I've given up everything." But instead, he just nodded and said, "I'll try harder." Ellie was quieter, but Thomas saw the hurt in her eyes. When she asked why they never took family trips or why her ballet shoes were always secondhand, he'd say, "We're saving for something special." That wasn't a lie. He was saving them. Then winter came. Snow piled up against the truck doors. Nights dropped to single digits. Thomas began coughing blood but kept going. He wrapped himself in layers, used hand warmers, and told himself spring would come soon both outside and in life. One night, he opened his notebook and wrote, "They're starting to resent me, but that's okay. I'd rather be the villain in their childhood than the reason they suffer." Mr. Rick found him one morning asleep behind the wheel, windows frosted over. Without a word, the old man left a space heater and a thermos of black coffee on the driver's seat. No one else knew. Not the school, not the factory, not even the kids. But Thomas's world had shrunk to exactly 2 reasons to keep going. And no amount of cold or heartbreak could shake his resolve to give them a chance, even if it meant they'd never know the price. The acceptance letters came in thick, embossed envelopes with gold seals and school crests. Ethan was accepted into MIT on a full scholarship for engineering. Ellie received a full ride to NYU for pre-law. Thomas held the letters in trembling hands, tears welling up, his breath caught in his throat like a prayer finally answered. He didn't cheer. He didn't jump. He just sat in silence at the kitchen table, staring at those envelopes as if they were keys to a door he'd been building for 15 years. And now they had opened it themselves. That night, he didn't sleep in the truck. He unfolded an old blanket, lay down on the couch inside the house, and allowed himself one indulgence, a dream. For the first time in over a decade, Thomas imagined a future for himself. Maybe he could take a day job. Maybe he could even take care of his heart condition properly, instead of ignoring it like background noise. Maybe, just maybe, his job as a father was done. But hope, as he had learned long ago, was a fragile thing. His cough returned with a vengeance. Sharp, ripping. He hid it from the kids, brushing it off as dust from the factory. But Ellie noticed the way he winced while climbing stairs. Ethan caught him holding his chest one morning while lifting groceries. He downplayed everything. "Old bones," he'd joke. "Don't worry about your old man." But at night, alone in the bathroom with the fan on full blast, he coughed into a towel-stained red more days than not. He visited the doctor in secret. The news was grim. His heart was operating at 30% capacity. "You're running on fumes," the physician said. "You need to stop working immediately." Thomas just laughed. Stopping isn't in the job description. Still, the doctor handed him a pamphlet on assisted living, as if preparing for the inevitable. He didn't read it. Instead, he returned to the garage and opened his notebook again. Wrote a letter titled, "If I don't make it to graduation, M." He added a photo of the twins at age 5 grinning with chocolate on their faces, paper-clipped it to the page. Then, he walked next door and handed the notebook back to Rick. "Keep it safe," he said, voice barely above a whisper. Rick didn't ask questions, just nodded and locked it away. Graduation was 3 months away. Thomas circled the date on the calendar. It was his finish line. If he could just make it there, then maybe, for once, he could sit in the audience. Maybe, for once, he could just be dad. Graduation day arrived beneath a soft summer sun, the kind of warmth that made the whole town feel like a movie set. Rows of folding chairs stretched across the school field, balloons danced in the breeze, proud parents gathered with phones held high, capturing the moment their children crossed the stage into adulthood. Thomas wasn't there. Ethan stood backstage, checking his phone every few minutes. No missed calls, no messages. Ellie scanned the crowd, squinting for a familiar flannel shirt and tired smile. But their father, always early, always waving from the front row, was nowhere to be seen. "Maybe he got stuck at work," Ethan muttered. But even he didn't believe it. Thomas hadn't missed a single event in 15 years. Not a soccer game. Not a spelling bee. Not a single recital. Something was wrong. After the ceremony, while other graduates posed for photos and threw their caps in the air, Ethan grabbed Ellie's arm. "We're going home." now. They arrived to find the truck in the driveway, but no sign of Thomas inside the house. Then Ellie saw Ethan's factory boots, soaked in blood, sitting by the back door. They found him collapsed in the garage, pale and barely breathing, his hands still smeared with grease from what looked like a last attempt to fix the water heater. The ambulance came fast. The ER lights were bright, but time moved in slow motion. Thomas drifted in and out of consciousness, whispering names, mumbling about not missing the speeches. Ellie clung to his hand. Ethan paced the hallway, rage and fear colliding in his chest. That's when Mr. Rick appeared. Without a word, he handed Ethan the leather notebook, the one he'd kept safe for years. He said, if anything happened. They opened it in the hospital waiting room, thinking it was a will. Instead, they found page after page of letters, memories, hand-drawn sketches of birthday cakes and math problems, love notes to Marie, and instructions for the future. And secrets. The truck he slept in. The foreclosure. The hospital bills he paid in cash to avoid insurance red flags. The job he never quit, even when it was killing him. The violin he sold. The night Ethan was sick and Thomas had to choose between losing his job or holding his son's hand at the ER. Every page shattered a piece of the narrative they had built. The man they thought was just tired, just poor, just ordinary, was a warrior they never recognized. Ellie broke first, her sobs echoing down the sterile hallway. Ethan sat frozen, clutching a page where Thomas had written, "I never wanted to be your burden, I only ever wanted to be your reason." For years, Ethan believed his father had failed. He wasn't like other dads, no big career, no fancy house, no vacations or sleek cars in the driveway. While his classmates talked about ski trips and father-son fishing weekends, Ethan had mopped floors alongside Thomas just to pay for cleats. And now he realized he had misunderstood everything. As he turned the final page of the notebook, Ethan's hands trembled. Inside was a photo of the twins as toddlers, asleep on their father's chest, all three of them on a torn couch. Written beneath in Thomas's uneven script, "This was the best moment of my life. Everything after this was just me trying to make sure they'd never feel what I did." That sentence struck Ethan like lightning. Every frustration, every complaint, every time he muttered, "Why can't Dad be more like other parents?" All of it was rooted in ignorance. His father hadn't failed. He'd fought battles no one saw and won them without ever asking for credit. As Thomas lay unconscious in the ICU, his chest rising weakly under tubes and wires, Ethan made a silent vow beside Ellie. "We'll make this right. We'll make him proud." The following week, they delayed their university enrollments and did something no one saw coming. They turned down their scholarships. Instead, they returned home and pooled their energy into a project born of Thomas's life a company, not about money or prestige, but purpose. They called it Second Shift. And, quote, "It started as a nonprofit to help single parents, especially fathers, find resources, job training, mental health support, and emergency aid." They used Thomas's story as the anchor, his words as the mission. You don't have to be seen to be strong. Ethan handled the logistics and structure. Ellie built the brand, wrote articles, created campaigns that went viral. The janitor who raised 2 graduates alone and almost died doing it. The truck he slept in is now our logo. Their first fundraiser goal was $10,000. They raised $200,000 in the first month. Interviews followed, podcasts, news networks. People sent letters from all over the country, fathers who felt invisible, mothers who hid their illnesses, children who had no idea what their parents were enduring. The twins used every dollar to grow faster. They built an app for emergency childcare. They created pop-up clinics. They organized a mentorship network, all under one mission. No parent should have to choose between survival and dignity. Thomas eventually awoke in the hospital, groggy and confused. The first thing he saw was Ellie asleep in the chair beside him, her hand clutching his. The second was a stack of mail on the nightstand, fan letters, donations, one from the governor's office, inviting him to speak. He blinked, unsure if it was real. Ethan entered the room with a sheepish smile. "You always said your story didn't matter," he said. "Turns out, it saved a few thousand people this week." Thomas tried to speak, but couldn't. Tears did the talking. They showed him the sight. The photos. The Logoth silhouette of a truck beneath a starry sky. Thomas laughed through his tears. You used that truck? Every hero needs a cape, Ellie whispered. Yours had 4 wheels and a broken heater. And just like that, the man who had once mopped floors in silence now stood at the heart of a movement. Within 2 years, Second Shift was featured in Time magazine. It expanded across 5 states. One investor himself, raised by a single dad, wrote a check that made headlines, $5 million in backing. Thomas didn't cash it. He had Ethan and Ellie handle the business. He chose instead to speak at high schools, community centers, and shelters. When asked how it felt to be a millionaire, he always said the same thing. I was rich the moment my kids saw me for who I was. The invitation was gold-trimmed, with embossed letters and a red wax seal that felt more like a royal decree than a business event. Thomas held it in both hands, rereading the words over and over. You are cordially invited to the inaugural Second Shift Gala. Guest of honor, Thomas Reynolds. He chuckled, shaking his head. Guest of honor, huh? Ellie grinned. It's about time the world caught up to who you've been all along. The gala was held in a repurposed train station turned community hall in Detroit. Thousands attended: donors, parents, volunteers, and journalists. But none mattered more to Thomas than the 2 people waiting at the top of the stairs to escort him in. Ethan offered his arm. We've got you now, Dad. Inside, the walls were decorated with photos from Second Shift centers across the country. Smiling children, single parents, letters of gratitude. In the center of it all stood a massive installation, a replica of the very pickup truck Thomas once called home. It wasn't polished or repainted. It stood exactly as it had been: rusted, dented, a little sad, but proud. The audience hushed as the lights dimmed. Ellie took the stage. We created Second Shift to honor the sacrifices of unseen heroes. But tonight, we honor the man whose quiet strength taught us everything. She turned toward her father. He raised us on love, not money. On character, not comfort. He gave everything so we could have anything. Then Ethan stepped up beside her, his voice steady. Some people ask if we're self-made. We're not. We're father-made. The audience rose in a standing ovation. Thomas sat frozen, his throat tight. His eyes shimmered but didn't spill. He wanted to see it all. Every face, every tear, every flash of light. Then came the gift. Ethan and Ellie walked him outside, where a driver waited beside a vintage Chevy truck restored, gleaming in deep blue with chrome trim. Same model, Ethan said, but this one comes with heated seats and no broken dreams. Thomas laughed and cried at the same time. They didn't stop there. Ellie handed him a set of keys to a modest ranch house on the edge of Traverse City Marie's dream town, the place they once planned to retire. It's yours now, she whispered. Time to rest. You earned it. And so, Thomas Reynolds, a man who once sold his wedding ring to buy Formula Now, stood at the center of a world he helped build. Not with money, he visited centers across the country for a while, telling his story, shaking hands with parents who said, I thought I was alone. But eventually, he settled into that quiet ranch house. He planted tomatoes, read old books, wrote new letters. And every month, a new notebook would arrive in the mail from Ethan or Ellie, filled with updates, photos, gratitude. One of them had a simple note clipped to the front. We see you now, Dad. On a quiet Sunday morning, Thomas sat on the porch of his new home, wrapped in a flannel blanket, a mug of tea warming his hands. The ranch stretched out before him, open fields, wind in the tall grass, birds chirping somewhere beyond sight. It was the kind of peace he once believed was meant for other people. People who hadn't buried their wives, slept in trucks, or lived paycheck to paycheck for 15 years. But now, it was his. Inside, on the worn kitchen table, sat his old leather notebook, faded, creased, and heavier than it looked. He flipped to the final page. There, in careful handwriting, he wrote, Turns out I didn't raise millionaires. I raised hearts that could change the world. He smiled, closed the book, and let out a long, quiet, breath-like exhaling 15 years of holding everything in. Later that afternoon, a group of kids from the local community center built by Second Shift came to visit. They ran barefoot across the field, laughing, carrying fresh vegetables from the garden Thomas had planted. Ethan and Ellie arrived shortly after, walking up the path side by side. No fanfare, no suits, just children returning home. They sat with their father on the porch, no words needed. The sun dipped low, painting gold across their faces. For a long moment, they simply watched the world they had created born from one man's invisible fight, now loud and alive. And in that silence, something sacred happened. A man who had once feared being forgotten was now unforgettable. What did this story mean to you? Drop a comment, like the video if it moved you, and share it with someone you care about.